when my father, opened up Moreno's Liquors, he pretty much put all his money that he had into that store. At that time, that building was owned by my grandfather, was a grocery store, if I remember correctly, before he turned it into a liquor store. And my grandfather gave my father a $1,000 loan to help him start off the shop. So my dad, was really, really hopeful that the store was going to do well. But obviously, like any entrepreneur, it's a gamble. You don't really, truly know until you open up whether it's going to be successful or not. And when he opened Moreno's Liquors, a wonderful story that he told me was the first day he opened, he was sitting there and my grandfather's coming in with fruits and veggies and stuff, of course, because he's trying to still turn it into a bodega. And no one's coming into the store. And finally, a customer walks in. My dad is so happy to see someone. He's telling him, "Oh, please just come over here, try these." And he's pouring him, various different tequilas and other spirits that we have, which is very common of my father. If he sees you, he's going to try to have you sit down. He wants to talk with you. He wants you to, enjoy what he's drinking. And so they're sitting there, and they're having these drinks, and then the customer finally goes, I feel really bad. I didn't want to say a lot, but honestly, I just came in to use the bathroom. And he said, "Oh, that's okay." And so he ended up buying a stick of bubble gum. And my father, on his first day opening, made 5 cents. That's all he made for the entire day. By the end of that week, he had sold an entire trailer load of Cazadores tequila. So it just goes to show that even though the first day, you might feel defeated, you're like, "Man, I didn't get anybody to come in," he was onto something. And, there were people that were interested and there was a demand. And if it wasn't for my grandfather giving him that opportunity, if it wasn't for, even that one customer coming in, it's easy to be defeated, but to persevere and say, "No, I could do this. This is something that I'm passionate about." It just goes to show that, this is the entrepreneurial endeavor that's kind of in us. And when you care about something so much, you're going to do anything and everything to make sure you succeed. And even that trailer load that came in, back then, the liquor companies, so nowadays you have to pay within 30 days when you get any product in. Back then, nobody was buying this stuff, and my father was the one saying, "I could sell it." He was taking another gamble and was able to get these companies to give him 90-day, 120-day, paybacks, bill backs for these products. And with that extra capital, because he didn't have to pay it for 90 to 120 days, but he sold a trailer load in the first week, he was able to build very quickly and continue to bring on new products. And that's how we were able to expand in a very short period of time.
What year did he open the liquor store first?
Yeah, 1977.
77, okay.
47-year-old business. We were the first Latino liquor store to open up in Illinois.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So 77, I'm interested to hear a bit more about that demand, right? Is that, so
Yeah.
Obviously he was filling a niche. Can you tell me a little bit about, what your father saw about the community, or, why he was able to, just really kind of meet the moment in 1977?
Sure. Yeah, so when my father immigrated over in the late 50s, there was that mass migration of Mexicans coming over to the U.S., a lot of them going to Chicago because of the railroads and various industries that were opening up here. And, they were a lot of those people were a part of the Bracero program. So when they finally immigrated up to Chicago and settled down here, before the Latinos and Mexicans were moving into Pilsen and Little Village, they were over on the south side. But obviously we saw a massive influx of Mexicans moving to Pilsen, and then very shortly after that, Little Village. So Little Village being a bohemian neighborhood and always, an immigrant community, my father saw the change. He's like, there are a lot of Mexicans moving into this community, and there's things that we're missing, that we're not catering directly towards the Mexicans. And there were grocery stores. There had been Mexican grocery stores for a while at that point, but nobody was catering to the Mexican community at that time when it came to beers or liquor. And so, he just saw that and he said, well, why aren't we doing this? He saw an opportunity that a lot of people, I guess, were just passing up and weren't thinking about.
That's interesting. And I could imagine, I'm just guessing here, that there was a connection built between the liquor stores and other kinds of like cultural events, weddings, parties, things like that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how your dad supported those kind of events?
Yeah. Back then, we used to provide trailer loads, like whole trucks, to these weddings and various quinceañeras and stuff that were coming up. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. You have big venues that take care of all of that. But back then, my dad bought a big truck and would just fill it and go over and try to take care of all of these various parties that were going on. And that also was one of the big reasons why we were able to grow so quickly. People were talking about it. And even today, you hear, oh, go to Moreno's, and that means a lot to me because it shows how hard we work to get to where we are now. But my father was constantly kind of working with the various community members, and at the same time, it wasn't just about the liquor store, it was about the community. And that's what was so important to us. My father didn't just say, okay, I'm going to open up a liquor store and try to make as much money. One of the things that he always told me, and is very much stuck in my brain, is take care of the community that is taking care of you. So my father was always very ingrained in the community. Even today, if you see him, he walks up and down the street, and he kind of seems almost like the mayor of Little Village, where a lot of people see him, oh, Don Moreno, or Miguel, some people call him Miguel, and they talk about him with such high regard. And so I know if my father is going down the street and he says, oh, I'll be right back, it might take him 30 minutes to an hour, because he will literally stop for every single person he sees to say hi, to greet them. That's just the kind of person he is. He's very sociable, and he cared a lot about the community.
And I would imagine that really served him well as a business owner, right? Just being so friendly. Can you tell me a little bit more about, what you learned from your dad about running a business, interacting with customers, interacting with the community, like on a day-to-day basis? How did that look?
Yeah, I learned almost everything from my father. Obviously, not to take away anything that my mom has done too, because she's taught me a tremendous amount. And I don't think I would have been able to, for example, the bar that I opened up, been able to do the things that I did if it wasn't for the help from both of them. Because I learned very different things from both of them, and it's helped me become the person that I am today. But as far as, talking about what my father has done, when I was a kid, I used to spend most of my time with my dad. And he would kind of show me how he would, run things, the ropes, as you would call it. And a lot of times that had a lot to do with, okay, how are you going to be talking to people? He would bring me to meetings. My father was one of the founders of the Little Village Chamber of Commerce. He was the second president of the chamber. He actually was one of the founders of the arch that was put up. That was one of his ideas, and fought very hard for that. But in order to do stuff like that, you have to be personable. And so he taught me how to talk to people and how to mingle and make sure that you keep a lot of friends, because that's what my father did. He has, even today, many friends. And when I was a kid, I used to say, oh, my father has all these friends, jokingly, like, yeah, he says everybody's his friend. But then when you see them and you talk to them and you hear how they talk about my father, that's how I know, no, these aren't just people. They actually truly respect him, and they would consider him a friend. Because, the amount of times where he's been able to get something done, he makes a phone call, and they're like, of course. There's no hesitation. That speaks volumes, I think, to a person's repertoire. And so, for me, as I grew up, I would be in the store, and I'd see him standing up there, greeting customers, talking to them. How's your family? How are your nieces? Working with the local PD, trying to make sure that the politicians in the community are helped out when they needed to raise money. He was always heavily involved. And that also went down to the non-for-profit work, and that was something that I always saw too. and something that I've been involved with since I was a kid was, if, again, very similar to my grandfather, if somebody asks for $5, you give them $10 because they need that money. And so taking care of your community is the most important thing. And so he used to work very closely with a lot of the non-for-profits, and a lot of the things that I do is because of the stuff that I learned from him.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I imagine as you grew up, working in the liquor store, observing your father, learning from your mother, and just kind of like absorbing these life lessons, you started to move out on your own. Can you tell me a little bit about that process, about how you went from learning from your dad to being a businessman yourself?
Yeah, I jokingly state that my first business was a lemonade stand. And when I jokingly state that, the reason why is because I opened up a small lemonade stand in the suburbs when I had moved out there. I grew up in Chicago in Archer Heights, and then I moved to the suburbs shortly after that. And when I moved out there, I think innately in my blood, I just kind of felt like I needed to do something. And I was like, well, let's start a lemonade stand. And I remember asking my parents, I said, how much does it cost for lemonade? And they were like 50 cents. I didn't know what inflation was. I didn't know any of that at that time. And I just kind of said, well, that was how much it was when you were a kid. I said, now it's $1. So I started selling the lemonade for $1, and I was making $100 a day selling lemonade, to the point where I had 2 employees. There were 2 other kids that were coming over, and I would have them hold signs and kind of market what I was doing. So that was kind of my first endeavor into entrepreneurship. And so when I got into high school, I already kind of knew I want to get into entrepreneurship. I actually started taking business courses by my senior year of high school, and I applied to DePaul University specifically for the entrepreneurship program, business management, and then finance. I wanted to have a good, well-rounded understanding of how businesses are run. And my first business I actually opened up, I was 24 years old. It's called Imports. It's a company that I've had for a very long time. It's actually probably one of my fastest growing companies right now. But I had opened that business the same time. When I opened that business, my father told me, he said, I opened Moreno's Liquors when I was 24 years old. So when I thought about that, I said, wow, this is kind of surreal. He opened that when he was 24. I opened this business when I was 24. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I had a concept. I had an idea of what I wanted to do. But I didn't fully grasp, okay, what does it take? I had a business plan and all of that, but it's, again, not until you get your hands dirty and you start getting in there that you truly start to understand how to run a business. So that was my first business that I opened up. And then I got, further involved in the liquor store, moving up the ranks. But in 2019, I decided to open up another business, kind of like a sister business to Moreno's Liquors, called Ositos Tap. And that is a small speakeasy hidden behind my liquor store for the community. And so that was, I guess you could say, my second business that I opened up, and has been hugely successful for me. And in the end, I told people, I said, I'm opening this business because this is what the community deserves, and I'm hoping to inspire more young Latinos to reinvest in their community. Because if you want a community to do well, you need to make sure that you invest in it, and you want to inspire more people to do so. And so I'm really proud of that, and I've seen other people that are opening businesses telling me, I saw what you did, and I wanted to do the same. And I said, that's all I wanted. In the end, all I wanted is to see more people reinvest, because I was tired of seeing so many of our brightest people leaving the community and saying, oh, there's better opportunities. Well, no, the opportunity's right here. You just need to look for it. And so yeah, that's kind of how it started.
That's awesome. And I'm just, because I have the suburban connection, when you mentioned your lemonade stand, which suburb was it?
I had opened it up in Burridge.
Burridge, okay,
yeah.
Okay, all right.
So as you could see, obviously $1 a lemonade.
It's gone up a little bit since then, yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
How much are they selling their lemonade now?
I have no idea. Yeah, Ositos Tap, can you tell me a little bit about, the vision for it and how your vision for Ositos Tap has matched how it's grown over the years?
Yeah.
Is you started in 2019, so I imagine the following year was a major challenge.
Incredibly.
Maybe could you tell me a little bit about the story of Ositos
Yeah,
Tap?
of course. Ositos Tap, I didn't know what the name was going to be yet, but that was a concept and idea that was in the back of my head. I'm constantly running ideas in my head. If you talk to my sisters, they tell me that I need to slow down. They say, you have all these ideas, but you need to focus on what you're doing. And they're right. But there's still, it's just how I am. I've always there's tons and tons of business ideas that I still would like to, come to fruition. But that was one that was really important to me that I had all the way back to 2016. And I started talking to people in the community and just kind of asking, what's your idea if we were to open up a bar in Little Village, but not just any bar, a community bar, a place where you could relax, where you don't have to worry about anything. And really, I had been talking about it, and it wasn't until 2018 when I was at the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce Awards. I was there completely alone, wasn't talking to anybody. I think I was just standing there with a drink in my hand. And two people from the city of Chicago approached me, and they said, "You're Mike Moreno, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, we heard that you want to open up a bar in Little Village." Mind you, I hadn't told a ton of people about this, so I'm not entirely sure even to this day who told them. But I said, "Yeah, I am thinking that." And they said, "Well, there's a Neighborhood Opportunity Fund grant that's coming up, and you should apply." And when someone from the city of Chicago tells you should apply, you apply. And so I got their card, emailed them, I think maybe the next day, maybe a couple days after that. And they said, "Yes, here's all the information. By the way, you have to get everything in by the end of December." It was the end of November at this point. I had 1 month to get a business plan together and send it to the city. And I work very well under pressure. I might get very stressed by it, but I work very well under pressure. And somehow I was able to get everything together, submitted it. And I got a call, I remember this very, very vividly, from Mayor Rahm Emanuel. It was, I believe, the end of January at about 6:30 a.m. I was driving into work. I got a call. I answered it. And he said, "This is Mayor Rahm Emanuel, and I just wanted to congratulate you on getting the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund grant." And then everything hit me. And I was, at first I was ecstatic, and I said, "Wow, this is crazy." And then I was like, what am I even doing? I don't even entirely know. I've never run a bar before. I just have an idea. So that's when I immediately was like, okay, I need to make this happen. I said, it's happening. So I started calling up my contacts and my good friends, and Jen Park, who is a very good friend of mine and a wonderful architect. I called her first, and I said, "Jen," I said, "I'm planning on building a bar. I need your help." She said, "Of course." And I had this vision. It was very clear for me. I knew what I wanted to do. And she told me, she said, "Mike, I'm not building this bar for you because you're my friend." She said, "I'm building this bar because I want to win awards." And I said, "Why do you think I hired you?" I said, "I love, how passionate you are about it." She said, "Well, you make it very easy." She said, "Because your vision is so clear." She said, you painted a picture for me, and here we are now. So when I opened that bar, I was like, okay, I had a vision. I said I want it to be a mix of classic old world Chicago with that modern Latin vibe. And, I wanted to make it in touch and in root with the community, but also with my own past. And I was like, well, I'm going to call it Ositos Tap. And people said, well, why are you going to call it Ositos Tap? I said, well, if you don't know me, then it would be confusing. But if you come to my store, you'll see that I walk in every single day with my small Chihuahua. And so I thought it was funny. I said, okay, we're in Little Village, Mexican neighborhood. You see Chihuahuas just walking around on their own in the streets. And my dog is named Osito. He looked like a little black bear to me, so I called him Little Bear. And I said, we're going to call it Ositos Tap. I said, who doesn't love dogs? It's a Chihuahua on the logo. And I used to bring him in every single day. I miss that dog every day, but I used to bring him to work. And at 7 and 10 p.m., every day he would come out and greet customers, and people loved it. And so, that was kind of the ideas that I had. But I was like, how am I going to get in touch with the community And I was incredibly nervous because I didn't want people to assume that I was building something that was not attainable for them. I wanted to make this a bar where people came in and they could be dressed very nice or they could be dressed extraordinarily casual. And if you see me at my bar, a lot of times I'm dressed very casually. That's just how I like to dress. I'm very, I want to be comfortable for the most part. But I wanted customers to feel like they had $1 million whether they did or didn't. And that was important to me. I wanted them to feel like they were at home. I wanted them to have this warmth when they walked in and kind of get lost and immersed in the bar, but at the same time say, okay, wow, I don't know where I am right now, but I want to be here. And that's how it kind of started, and we started building from that. And I started, talking to some more community members, and talking to non-for-profits and various other people, and saying, let's have events here. Let's, do Loteria Night where we could raise funds for the community. Let's make sure that, we're taking care of everybody and welcoming everybody here. But I was very nervous when I opened the bar because I didn't know if everyone would accept it. And when I opened, there were some people pushing back a little bit and saying, oh, is this something that the community needs? But I changed their opinions as we opened up and we stayed open. We're 5 years old at this point. I was able to see people that at first were like, I'm not going into that bar, to now saying, I love this place. This is great. The cocktails are amazing. The food is great, and it's very welcoming, and I see the things you do for the community, and that's, in the end, all I wanted. I just wanted a place where everyone was welcome, a safe space for all to enjoy.
Yeah, and that's awesome, and that's not an easy balance, I imagine.
It was really hard, yeah.
So we're almost at time. I do just have one more question, and then give you an opportunity to share anything that maybe we didn't cover, any other messages. So I'm imagining Ositos Tap and Moreno's Liquors like kind of fitting in this whole landscape of, particularly Ositos Tap, I guess, of Latino small businesses, whether they be breweries, whether they be restaurants, just kind of emerging across the Chicagoland landscape. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about what the Latino business community, particularly the younger Latino business community, like what state is it at right now in Chicago, and what do you hope for the future of that community?
For me, when I think about Latino businesses, I think about where we started and how far we've come. Because just as well as I do that when it comes to our history and our culture in general, it's very individualistic. A lot of people are like, this is what I built, this is mine. That's not how I think. And I think a lot of young Latinos are also noticing that as well. We need to work together to grow. And so I'm seeing a lot more collaboration. I'm seeing a lot more partnerships. And it makes me extraordinarily proud to see that, because people are understanding that if you want your community to be a healthy middle class or higher, you need to work together. It's not about how much money I can make. It's about how much money we can make. And so you see that nowadays where a lot of businesses, I could call up my good friend Javi over at Big Mitch. I could call up my friends over at Casa Humilde or Diego, various other wonderful Latino-owned businesses, and say, hey, I want to raise some money, or let's do a collaboration for the community. And there is a 99% chance they're going to say yes. And that, to me, is what it's all about. It's about working together. It's about realizing that we didn't do this alone, that we had a tremendous amount of help from the community, from our families, and so on and so forth to get to where we are. And so to see that shift in kind of how we think today is tremendously important, and it makes me really happy because the future is extremely bright. I'm sure everybody is just as aware that, kind of like Latino culture is huge right now. It's everywhere. And it's in our music, it's in the food. I mean, everything we have is in one way, shape, or form involved with our heritage. Now, let's make sure we preserve that for our families for generations to come.
That's a really, really great message, I think, to end on, and I really appreciate it. But I do want to give you any opportunity to share any other messages that you have, or cover any topics that maybe we didn't cover in this interview.
Sure. I have to think.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I just hope that with this kind of work and all the hard work that everybody's put in, that we realize the opportunity that we have, and that we're able to continue to take care of each other. I do pro bono work for the city of Chicago with the SSA. I did a Mano y Mente program with Esperanza Health Center, and I'm not saying those things to boast. I'm saying that with the finite amount of time that I have, I'm able to do it. Other people are able to do that as well. Make sure that you're taking care of each other. Take care of yourself as well, but nothing brings me more joy. I think some of the happiest times in my life was when I was giving back. I used to do microfinancing down in Honduras and Panama, and seeing that you were able to change someone's mindset and help them, not necessarily by just giving them something, saying here, but teaching them something that has a long-lasting impact, because then they could teach someone else those same tools. And now it's a domino effect, and everybody around is learning. And so, in my opinion, knowledge is power. I always tell people an educated consumer is a good consumer. That's how I run my businesses. We have to do the same thing with our communities. Let's make sure that we're giving them proper financial literacy. Let's make sure that we're, taking care of them when there's food shortages like we had with the pandemic. We have to continue that. And if we stop now, then we lose that momentum. But there's so much more that we could be doing. And I'm really, really hopeful for the future of not just Little Village, but the state as a whole when it comes to working together.